Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode of our Kontext Coffee Chat. Today, I am speaking with Komal from India. This is our first year of Indian coffee at Kontext Coffee, and we're quite excited about that. And yeah, I'm really happy to be speaking with Komal of South India Coffee Company today, who we bought our first Indian coffee from. Welcome, Komal, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm very excited to see Indian coffee with Kontext. So let's see what the customers have to say about it.
Yes. All right, Komal, maybe give us a brief introduction of who you are, where you are in the world, and what you do and why you do what you do.
So my name is Komal. I'm a co-founder at South India Coffee Co. We are basically a direct trade. We do specialty coffee, Indian specialty coffee, and it's a direct trade setup where we have coffees coming in from different producers across India, and we sell them to roasters directly or through importers as well. I really started South India Coffee Co. because I was in the UK for the longest time. And at that point, I didn't see any Indian coffee there. And the idea was to kind of showcase the quality that we have as Indian coffee. And that's where it all started. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to really put Indian coffee on the map and have the producers talk for them about themselves with what the coffee is, how the coffee is produced here in India, and just showcase what Indian coffee is all about.
Great, sounds amazing. Yes. And you're not only a coffee trader, so to speak, so you don't just export other people's coffee from India to the world, but you're also a coffee farmer, aren't you? Tell us a little bit about your own estate.
So me and my husband run something called Mule Money Estate, and this has been in the family for around 5 generations. They've been growing coffee. Along with coffee, there's also pepper and all these other agroforestry. It's an agroforestry setup. At the farm, we are producing coffees which are usually naturals or honey sun-dried, and we're not trying to do any washed coffees, mainly because we want to try and keep our resources as we use as less resources as possible. One is that, and two is I think we want to kind of showcase what good naturals or good honey sun-dried coffees from India could taste like. Along with that, like that has kind of got being in India and taking care of the farm over the past few years. We've also seen a lot of climate change take place, and we've seen that over the last, say, around 4 years or 5 years that we've been here during harvest season, we've always seen something that is not supposed to happen during that time of the year, and that's what led us to kind of look into low intervention coffee, is what we've started looking at after that.
Low intervention coffee. So that basically means looking after your resources, or what exactly does low intervention coffee mean?
So low intervention really means like we want to try and put as less, we want the coffee to look after itself, and we don't want to intervene with it as much as we would. Like, for example, like a Robusta and an Arabica, we take care of it a lot. Like we have a lot of practices, agriculture practices that go around throughout the year to take care of that plant right from harvest till the whole cycle finishes, and then taking care of the plants post that for the next year's harvest. Now, we want to try and see if it is possible to reduce our inputs and get a medium to average yield of coffee. And this may be something that might not have to be Arabica, Robusta. It could be other species.
All right. That brings us right to the main focus of the conversation that we chose for today, which is your work with different coffee species, because this is something from my observations anyways, that is quite unique about the work that you do, and that sets you apart as well, not just from other coffee producers and exporters in India, but you are at the forefront of a lot of genetic research and species research in coffee for many other places as well, I would say. So maybe we can start off this conversation with a brief overview of what we're actually talking about. Because at Kontext, we sell Arabica coffees mainly, but we also always have one Robusta in the product range. And maybe we can just give a brief explanation of what that actually means, if you wouldn't mind.
So, okay, so basically, coffee has, as of now, there are 130 different coffee species. We are, as coffee growers, we are mostly focused on with two species, which is Arabica and Robusta. Arabica is, now bear with me, I'm just going to go a little technical here. What Arabica right now is a child of, or we can say it is derived from, Coffea eugenoides and Coffea canephora. Okay, so Coffea canephora and Coffea eugenoides all together make Coffea Arabica that we know and that we all drink and we love. Now, this is one species of coffee. Then you have, as you go further down, or you can take it just one step higher, where I said there's Coffea eugenoides and Coffea canephora. This is, so now we've come to like three species, right?
Yeah,
Let
so
me go
these are
further.
essentially the Latin names for three different species of coffee, right? Coffea canephora, Coffea eugenoides, and those are the parent species, and the child of the two is Coffea arabica, which is the most commercially used species of coffee in the world at the moment.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have got, and then in Arabica, you've got all your other cultivars that we call, which is shaped in, you've got your Typicas, bourbons, you've got in Typicas and bourbons, and you've got further segregations as well. Let's take a pause on that for a minute, but let's go back to species. In species, I'd like to talk about what we are doing, the work that we are doing in India. We've got actually native Indian coffee species. So this is not Arabica, this is not Robusta, this is not Canephora, but there are different species that have already been in India for a long time. The continental drift is what I have been reading in my books. So these species there is Travancorensis, there is Whiteana, there is Bengalensis. So again, we call them Coffea bengalensis, Coffea Travancorensis, Coffea Whiteana. These are native Indian coffee species.
Okay, I think I need a little break here, because that is something you mentioned it briefly in another conversation we had, and afterwards I had to kind of go back to that thought, and it just kind of blew my mind, because in the coffee world, we always get told that at least Coffea arabica and coffee as we know it as a drink originates in Ethiopia. That's the birthplace of coffee. That's where all the coffee in the world comes from. That's where it all started. But you're telling us now that that is only partially true, because at the time of the continental drift, essentially, there are different populations of this one type of plant. And India has its very own indigenous and native coffee species. That was news to me.
Yeah, even for us, it was like, the mind-blowing information, because when I started this kind of journey of coffee as species, I actually started it with the background of, I wanted to understand what is grown locally and what is grown before um, we in Indian coffee farms, a lot of silver oak is planted. Now I wanted to understand why silver oak is planted and what was planted before that. So when I started doing research, we started to talk about, these are the wild, this is native jungle plants that were already there in India, which were planted. And that kind of got me in reading about coffee species, and that got me reading to learn more. And it is kind of very widely available in a lot of the books that we read. If you're reading like big agricultural books about coffee, you will read about Travancorensis, Bengalensis, Vaitiana. They are quite, and there are papers written on it as well. It's something that we are now exploring in terms of whether it is a commercially viable product or not is a different story, but we are understanding why this was grown in these regions and how it is growing easily. So we started planting these, and we have like a small gene pool block where we are planting all these different species, and we're seeing that the native plants are obviously growing a lot easily as compared to others which don't have enough diversity or haven't been planted here before. Arabica and Robusta has had a lot of time to settle in these areas. So they are quite easy to grow now because they're commercially grown. So that is one part of it. Now, I want to come to the next part of it, where we started also exploring another species, which is Coffea excelsa. Now, excelsa is a subspecies of Liberica, Coffea liberica again. So these are plants. Well, I say plants. These are trees that are grown around the boundaries of coffee farms in India. The idea of growing these were basically that these are trees and you can essentially protect the boundaries or kind of essentially mark the boundaries of your farms. And that is why coffee, like we call it Marakapi, which is the local term for it. Mara means tree and kapi means coffee. So tree coffee is what they call it.
Specifically the excelsa.
Excelsa. On our farm, we have a lot of excelsas. In this region, overall, there is a lot of excelsa, but of course, there is Liberica as well in and around this region. And in other parts of Kerala, there is Liberica that is being grown. We started exploring this because this was already planted. We already had these on the farm, and me and Akshay were always very intrigued with this coffee, saying that, hey, why aren't we doing anything with it? And that's where we started thinking about the low intervention part of it, because we actually never paid any attention to these plants. They were just there. They used to bear fruit every single year. We used to harvest them, and that's it.
What did you do with them? What did you do with them?
We just sold them to the commodity market at that point of time, like just the middlemen traders. So we never gave it any attention. Or also many a times, like Akshay tells me the story that the coffee used to be used for home consumption. Like the excelsa would always be roasted for home consumption because there was no market for it.
Okay, can we go back and because you mentioned that it was planted, obviously, because this isn't a native Indian species, excelsa, just to be clear. This is one of the species that was brought into India, and it was used to be planted around the edges of the land, basically of the plantations. Any specific reason why they would make a good marker for the land, or?
So they are quite tall trees. And that was one reason I think would have been one of the reasons to be planted around. And it is essentially like a very eco-friendly way of kind of having another coffee added to the mix. and it is still like a fence kind of a setup for coffee farms. So it's like a 2-in-1. You don't put like cement poles or something that you see now, but you actually planting more trees showing this is the boundary of your farm.
Yeah, so it was basically just another type of tree, which happened to be a coffee species, but just a lot taller than the regular Arabica or Robusta trees or bushes that were planted, just to mark it visually, essentially. Maybe we can go one step back and kind of establish, out of all of the over 130 coffee species that you mentioned before, at this point in time, really, there are only 4 that are commercially used in any way, shape, or form, but really only 2 of them have an economic impact, and that's Coffea arabica and Coffea canephora, aka Robusta, which we know as Robusta, but technically speaking, Robusta is just, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it is just one variety of canephora. But it's just become, in our coffee language, it's become a synonym for Coffea canephora. And then the other 2 are Liberica and Excelsa that you mentioned. They are commercially used, but to a really, really small degree, right?
Absolutely.
So Arabica has the big part on the market, then Robusta or Canephora, different types of Canephora have a substantial, but also substantially smaller part of the market. And then the other 2 are almost negligible in economic terms. But maybe you can unravel a little bit for us where the actual differences are. We've started talking about Excelsa being taller as a plant. So on the one hand, there are plant characteristics that differentiate these 4 species. But then obviously for the coffee market, what's really interesting, and especially from a consumer point of view, is, are they different in taste, or why is it even worth mentioning that they are different species? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that for us.
I'm going to ask you the question on the difference in taste, but let me get back to the other one. So I think to start with, I'll give just visualizing the 3 different species. Your Excelsa is a tall tree with very broad leaves. Your clusters it depends, again, this is cross-pollinated. So it depends on the cherry characteristics are very different for different plants. But then you have a lot of them which have much tighter clusters. The bean size is, at least on our farms, the bean size is, the fruit size is large. Your mucilage underneath and all of that there is a lot more to it, but the bean size is very small. Then you've got your Robustas, which is a little more, it's a smaller plant than Excelsa, but it has, again, broader leaves, it has a broader structure. Root system wise, it has shallow rooting, and it needs a lot of water. Cherry wise, as fruit goes, it is much smaller. You have a lot more on each cluster, and it has a smaller, it is slightly bigger. I would call it slightly bigger than the Excelsas, just slightly bigger. And then you've got Arabicas. Now, Arabicas are a lot more daintier, smaller plants. The leaves are smaller. They are a lot more, if you even feel the tree in the leaf structure, in the way you feel the leaf, they are very, very different. So your Arabica will be a lot softer. It will be a lot more, what's the word for it? Very tactile. Then you've got the Robustas, which are a bit more robust, which is where the name comes from, and they're bigger, and you can feel that in the difference between the leaves. And then you've got the Excelsa, which is like a lot more leathery, and the leaves are a lot bigger, and you can feel that when you touch the three leaves as well. Let's go to caffeine content. The three have very different caffeine contents. Arabica Excelsa has the least amount of caffeine in it. We've tested it over the last 4 years, and from our farm specifically, I'm quite sure it should be similar in test for every other Excelsa as well. But so from our farms, when we get the tests, it's usually between 0.7 to 0.98%, which is a lot less than, of course, Robusta, which is I think 2.2 to 2.4, and Arabica is around 1 to 1.4. And maybe I've forgotten what the limit of Arabica is, but of course Arabica also has your Laurinas and others which are lower in caffeine. Taste wise, they're all very, very different. It's like literally comparing apples and oranges, I think. Tell me what experience you got when you tasted Arabicas, Robustas, and Excelsas.
Only thanks to you that I've recently had the opportunity to taste Excelsa for the first time. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think there is a consensus in the coffee world that Arabicas are the most exciting and complex, loads of different types of acidity and different fruity notes that you can find, floral notes. And so the coffee world has kind of honed in on this flavor complexity that Arabica has to offer. And that's the main reason why it's the biggest chunk of the commercially available coffee, because taste-wise, it has the widest variance of different flavor profiles on offer, basically. And then Canephora or Robusta specifically, I mean, you know this much better than I do, but traditionally it's been cultivated for lower quality coffees. Lots and lots of it worldwide goes into instant coffee production. And one of the reasons is that, especially if it isn't cared for, in the proper manner, or essentially cultivated for quality, then there can be quite a few off flavors. It's just a little bit less exciting than like earthy flavors, maybe even some like chemical flavors. And because of that, usually it goes either into blends or into instant coffee production. But I think the last 10, 15 years specifically has seen a real surge in high quality Canephoras. And so if it's done right, like you guys do, for example, it can be quite beautiful in its own right. I mean, I've talked about this before on some of the other Kontext coffee chats, and really to anyone who would listen. You do get these really nice chocolatey, smooth flavors, sometimes a bit more nutty. Sometimes you do get earthbound flavors, but not in the sense of earthy or dirty, but more in the sense of just really like spicy and quite elegant, really. And Robustas Canephoras do tend to bring more body to the cup as well. So Arabicas can be lighter, and they can have more body as well, but Robustas usually give you a really full flavor in the cup. And they're just less acidic. I think that's the main point. Less fruity, less acidic, but in their own right, they bring a really, really lovely and special flavor profile palette to the cup. And then Excelsa has really blown my mind. I mean, you've already managed to blow my mind twice now. That's just a completely different story. I'm really excited to launch your Excelsa later this year as well. But I mean, it's just so sweet. And I think, I mean, I don't, again, you tell me, but I assume that the one I tried was a natural process, that Excelsa, that was also an anaerobic fermentation. And I imagine that that also boosted that sweetness. But I imagine that the species itself just brings that enhanced sweetness to the cup alongside really a very, very like muted acidity profile. So the combination between those two, just if on tasting it, if I hadn't known that it was coffee, I think even I, working in the coffee industry for more than 10 years now, I'm not sure that I would have identified it as coffee right away, because it's just so different. So yeah, that's how I would describe it.
So I think I call Excelsa like a bridge between, if somebody who's whoever is, like somebody who's drinking like maybe an instant or a not specialty coffee, and who's not used to those kind of flavor profiles in specialty coffee. If you give them an Excelsa, it's a great bridge to start them off on their specialty journey. Just because it is not acidic, it doesn't make your mouth go like a lemon, and it has just that insane amount of sweetness that you mentioned right off the bat. Like, it's just sweet, and then you've got those fruity notes coming in. You have those bit of that fruit coming through, but you don't have, if it is dialed in well, and even as an espresso, I know that it can come out beautifully in terms of just sweet, good body, fruit, and very low in acidity. So to start off somebody on their specialty journey, I think this is a great option. And then go on to like maybe like your a very funky Robusta, and then go into like super light Arabicas, which are which can tend to get into more of these acidic and a little bit more acidity to the coffees, which will then kind of, I feel like your journey as in terms of tasting different coffees you change as you are drinking a lot more different coffees. Like, even I would have started off drinking an instant coffee and thinking, oh, it's bitter and I don't like it, or something of that sort. Or if I would have had a Robusta, and I'd be like, oh, this is a bad, I don't want to drink this coffee because it is too bitter and it's not to my palate. But if just imagine if somebody gave us just a really nice, well brewed, or a good shot of espresso of an Excelsa, I think we all would have been like, wow, this is amazing. We want to drink more of it. And it also doesn't give you the jitters that essentially, because it is low in caffeine.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if nothing else, then just to become aware of the incredible flavor and aroma palette that coffee has to offer as a plant, right? And as you said, I think it is a great addition. Even people, because I always tell people that they should try the Robusta to kind of get into those slightly more elaborate flavors and everything, especially coming from instant coffee, and that works really well. But yeah, with the Excelsa, I imagine that people who tend to have their coffee sweetened either with sugar or with syrups or something along those lines, I think this would be a really good point to start your journey into drinking black coffee, for example, either espresso or a filter coffee, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
And also the fact that it has less caffeine, I think, is quite interesting for sure.
And also, I think the journey of the Excelsa in terms of processing has been really an eye-opener for us, being on the farm, because we have never done any sort of processing to, as far as I remember, I think always the coffee was just a washed coffee in terms of for the Excelsa. And when we started processing it, we did like a really long black honey ferment, which was fermented for like hours together, and we just wanted to explore it because we didn't know how it's going to react in terms of flavor profile or how it's going to kind of turn out at the end of it. So we've had a lot of fun playing around with different processes over the years to understand what works and what doesn't. I hope we've kind of come out with some good processes over the years, but there's always potential for improvement.
Definitely amazing, though. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think the other thing is also you rarely ever get the opportunity to buy it anywhere, right? Because I imagine that in a lot of places, it is kind of overlooked, just like at your plantation. For the longest time, it was just a margin to what actually counted in the middle, right? So yeah, definitely. Thank you for embracing what's there and running with it. Maybe we can go back to your farm level work for a second here, because I know that apart from, I mean, you've described a little bit the differences in anatomy of the different plants, but we've stayed at the above ground level for now. I think what's underneath the soil is also quite important when it comes to these 3 different species, especially for the work that you do at your farm. No? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the thing is, when we started, let me draw something from when we started the work that we're doing now. We've had rains during harvest season every single year since we started taking care of this farm. Now, we realize that the routing system is something that we need to understand on what is working for us and what is not. At the end of the day, how important is the root system of any plant that you are growing? And how easily are you able to absorb the nutrition that you're giving it, and how deep is the root system going? These are the few things that we started exploring, and over the years we understood that as much as we all are embracing the Robusta part of it, unfortunately we are finding that Robusta has a very shallow root system. So it means that Robusta needs a lot of water. Now, just to give you an example, I was telling you in March, we didn't see a single drop of rainfall. The temperatures went up to 38 degrees on our farm, and that is unheard of. Okay, this means that the plants are precipitating more, they need more water, and they need to be taken care of. One way of going about it is you can have a bit more shade cover, which is your jungle trees and your top tier and your tier 1 and tier 2 of shade that you have in our coffee farms.
That means different levels, right? Different heights of shade plants, shade trees.
Yeah. So that is one way of mitigating when you have such high temperatures. You can keep your microclimate lower. Also, it means that when you look at your root systems, right? If you look at an Arabica root system, it has a deeper taproot. It goes deep inside looking for water and nutrients. Whereas your Robusta is a very shallow mesh-like system and does not have a very deep taproot, which means that these are surface feeders. So you need to make sure that there is nutrition on the surface level for it to be productive, or it needs to be essentially for it to be healthy and grow. We conducted an experiment where we removed an Excelsa plant and a Robusta plant in the same area when it was planted at the same time, and we removed the entire plant, and we saw that the root system of the two were very, very different. Excelsa had a very deep taproot, which means, again, it goes deep inside to look for nutrition, look for water, and can withstand high temperatures, heavy rainfall. Remember what I spoke about, like low intervention. So we don't really give it any nutrition, we don't give it any fertilizer, and it still gives you a medium crop year on year. Whereas your robustas, we are taking care of robustas. Like how much ever, a lot of people say, oh, it's not as intensive as Arabica. I feel like in India, we do a lot of work for both Arabica and Robusta, which is why the quality of Robusta is good in India. So when you look at the three very different species and their root structures, you understand why one is doing better in high heat. So for example, we had the temperature that I told you, right? Like the 38 degrees in March. The Excelsas were doing absolutely fine. The Arabicas in the shade regions were going absolutely fine, but the Robustas were suffering. So we need to kind of recalibrate and say that we need more shade. We need to put more shade trees around where we are planting our coffee. And we need to take care of the soil. We need to make sure that the soil has enough, is rich in nutrition and organic matter in general. So we have to make sure that you have to look down when you are planting or you're doing any sort of agriculture. You have to take care of the soil. Like that is the basics of at least what I understand from it. And that's how we are going about it now. So we are just understanding the root structures of what is working for us and saying that, hey, can we not use the root structure of an Excelsa and graft it onto an Arabica to see whether we can have a stronger, deeper root system and have Arabica cup quality? Or can we not do a graft an Excelsa rootstock onto a Robusta scion?
Okay, you'll have to explain what you mean by that a little bit, because I think that concept is absolutely brilliant, but a lot of people might not be familiar with grafting as a technique in agriculture.
So, so grafting is essentially when you take a rootstock of a certain species or a certain plant and put a different top on it. Eventually you kind of put it together and it combines together to give you a plant.
It is as it sounds. You just kind of put them on top of each other and fix them there, and eventually they will grow into each other. And so the plant that you grafted on top of the rootstock can then take advantage of the properties of that rootstock.
Absolutely. So we are doing all these different experiments on the farm to just understand whether this is going to work or not. Having said that, like Excelsa rootstocks have been used in Hawaii for a long time to be grafted onto Arabicas, and that's how they do their farms in Hawaii, and that's kind of worked for them over there. So there is research.
That's the secret of Kona coffee. Then I didn't know that. Is that the secret?
I'm not sure, but I think so.
Wow.
But that is why, I mean, see, here's the thing, right? Like we have to understand what is working for our soil, our kind of conditions, and different parts of coffee growing regions have their own one is terrain, one is your climatic conditions, how difficult it is to grow coffee in your regions. Based on that, you need to figure out what is working for you. So for example, this may work for us, and maybe like a Coffea racemosa's rootstock might work for your conditions. It depends on what your conditions are as a coffee grower and what is going to work for you in those certain climatic conditions.
Can you give us a sneak peek of first results of the experiments that you're doing? Does it look promising using Excelsa rootstock for either Robustas or Arabicas in your area?
So they are doing well. We have actually we've grafted a bunch of them on even like established plants. So we're just waiting to see how they grow in. So at this point of time, it's all a research kind of phase, and we don't have much information to kind of divulge in. But they are looking healthy at this point of time. We did a really cool experiment actually, where we have a 100% eugenioides, like Coffea eugenioides that I spoke about earlier, and we planted that, and that was not doing well in our conditions. So we grafted it onto an Excelsa rootstock, and it's doing fantastically well. It's alive and it's doing okay. So I'm like, oh, I need to keep this alive. Just one of those things where you're looking after these things like babies, and then you're just stressed that it's just going to like pop one day. I'm like, oh my God, this is so stressful. This is the reason I don't have children.
Well, you have children, many, many, many of them. They just have green leaves instead of hair and hands, and yeah.
So this is one of the experiments which has been kind of we were really thrilled with the way the plant actually took to the rootstock, and it has now survived. So let's see what happens as we go further, because since it is our gene kind of block, which is our species block, is just, it's out there. It is essentially subject to rainfall and the sunlight that we have for everything else. We have to be very careful with how it's growing. But I think if it grows in these conditions, then it should be fine. And then we can look at further propagation as well.
All right. I think one thing to keep in mind, I don't know how long you've been experimenting with grafting, but I mean, coffee trees in general, they do take their sweet time before they actually start to bear fruit and be productive, right? So that is part of the waiting period, I imagine, not just to see how the grafting itself works out, but also it has to grow to a certain maturity to actually start bearing fruit and being productive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think these are not, and none of these projects really are like a 1 or a 2 year, goal. These are like more like 5, 10, 15-year goals. And we have to learn, we have to be very patient with the outcomes. So we'll see what happens in the next few years.
How long have you been running the farm, Mulemane?
So it's been in the family for 5 generations. Me and Akshay have taken over. We started looking after it in 2017. I say 2017, but we were still doing it very remotely. We used to come here during harvest season, but we were completely involved in it 2019 onwards.
Okay, so, and I imagine you didn't start experimenting right away. You just had to kind of find your feet and all of that. So for all of these experiments, maybe what, the last 2, 3, 4 years?
3 years, yeah, between 2 and 2.5 years. Yeah.
All right, yeah. So you're still in the waiting phase.
Oh yeah, we're very much in the waiting phase at the moment. We're just about taking care of them, and we, like, for example, the Travancorensis, it keeps blooming every month, and then we have fruits. One issue that we're seeing is like the birds and the animals and the little insects love them, so they keep eating them, and I'm like, stop eating my fruit.
That's one of the native coffee species, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, actually, maybe now that you brought it up, maybe we can have a brief detour into that. Did you have to venture far to find these native species, or did you actually have them on the farm already and you just didn't really, just like with the Excelsa, pay much attention to them? Or how are they used, cultivated? What's their significance in India from a commercial point of view?
Had to search for them. We had to like find them and go around and search for these things. But commercial cultivation, they are not being cultivated commercially. Overall, the bean sizes are very small, which is why I think when Arabicas were planted commercially, you could see that this has taken off with the bean size and overall structure of the plant and things like that. So at this point, we are looking more in terms of I feel like there are some species like the Bengalensis has a good plant structure. It has good seeds. The cherry, the seed, the fruit size is pretty decent of it. Even like Whitiana is growing really wild everywhere in a particular belt, which is, in Tamil Nadu. And that's possible. So I feel like in the era that we are in of specialty coffee, it doesn't have to be that we are doing like insane volumes of these, but even if we are doing like smaller volumes and there is appreciation for this, so that we don't lose out on completely, yeah, I mean, we don't lose out on the genetic material of it, because if we are not going to propagate it, people are going to forget about it and we won't know that it even existed. So I think it's important for us to just keep that alive and see, even if we're doing like smaller volumes, and at this point of time, we can kind of experiment with that, especially in this time of with the specialty coffee scene wanting to explore different things. I think we are in a great place to kind of discuss this and even like talk more about these species now.
Yeah. So I guess there are different levels on which your work is quite important in many ways. One is, as you said, these species are, even though they're in the literature, in the actual coffee world, where people talk about coffee, drink coffee, enjoy coffee, want to know everything about coffee, they're not known. And so it's worth preserving them just for the sake of having these plants on this planet, right? But then also,
I think, sorry, but another thing in terms of the species is that it is a lot easier to grow, and you're not looking after them and they're just growing.
yeah.
So that again gives me a feeling like, of the lower intervention options, we have these to kind of we have this as an option. And second, we could again look at what the root structure is, whether we can use this as a root structure for further propagation with other, putting it onto other species in terms of grafting as well. So these are the things that I am looking at. It's not just whether that species itself is commercially viable, but whether it can lend itself to climate resilience and climate variability.
Yeah, exactly. That was the second level that I was heading towards, because the big majority of coffee in the coffee growing world is based on a very small amount of seeds of Arabica coffee that has been initially taken from Ethiopia and has been spread around the equator via colonialism, essentially. The genetic diversity of the majority of coffee plants that are grown commercially in the world is very, very low. And so, especially with view to climate change and the consequences of climate change for coffee cultivation, I think, as you said as well, having all of these other coffee species at our disposal and knowing them, having studied them and their properties in terms of how they grow, where they grow, the root systems and all of that will become more and more significant to help coffee cultivation worldwide to become more resilient to climate change, right? What kind of properties that these Indian species bring to the table could potentially be used in breeding or other ways of making coffee more resilient as a plant. And then, the last level I think that is also worth mentioning is that out of all of these known coffee species, one quite important reason from a commercial point of view why not many of them are significant is also that they don't necessarily are palatable. Not all of them, as I understand it, are even usables. I think I read somewhere that there are a number of species that are even toxic in the sense that they can't be used for consumption. That's obviously not the majority of them, but just because they have coffea in the name doesn't necessarily mean that they are palatable immediately. So that is also something to look out for also in breeding, because there are always two sides to that story, right? From an agronomic point of view, you have to make sure that the plant is resilient, that it can grow in the situation where it needs to grow, with all the aspects that you mentioned in terms of the root system, of the ability to absorb nutrients and water, the resistance in the foliage to certain pests and diseases and all of that. But on the other hand, the plant also has to produce fruits and seeds that bring a good cup profile to the coffee cup, so people actually enjoy drinking the coffee that comes from those plants, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that brings me to I have to tell you this. So we did this cup tasting, right? Like in September, there was World Coffee Conference in India, and there was we hosted a workshop which had around 11 different coffee species that we tasted. Now in those, there was a lot of excelsa from different parts of the world. There was a South Sudan, I think there was coffee from South Sudan, then there was Indian excelsas, which were ours. Then we had Igbo coffee, there was Laurina, there was Stenophila eugenoides. Those are the things that we tasted. And one thing that got me thinking when we tasted all these different species was, you have to have an open mind to different coffee, to not just coffee flavors or what you are used to as coffee, but you have to open your mind just to what coffee could taste like. Yes, we know that coffee tastes like, we've been drinking Arabica and Robusta for so many years, so we know this is what is comfortable to us. But if you just explore a little bit out there and you just give your mind that little bit of a, saying that let's try it, and don't just put yourself in this one box, you would be surprised as to what you can taste that is coffee. And it just is absolutely mind-blowing to kind of even think that all those different kind of flavors even exist in coffee.
I love that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think as a coffee professional, whenever I do any kind of seminars or classes, no matter whether I give them or I take classes, one of the aspects that always comes up is the huge flavor depth and variety in coffee. That there are so many aromatic compounds. Researchers are still discovering more and more and more compounds. It's one of the most complex foods that we know, and all of these are words, right? But to actually start to go into this incredible variance of what coffee can taste like is just something that's, on a sensorical level, is just so exciting. And I mean, it definitely sounds like you guys are kind of, helping us to enter into a new age of coffee almost, no? with a whole set of new flavors that is possible because of exploration of different species. And as you said, allowing your mind to go to those places and still identify that as coffee and learn to appreciate those new flavors as well. And not just because they are there, but more than anything, because this work will be so important going forward in terms of climate change resilience and future-proofing coffee, really, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this was really, really exciting and inspirational. I could go on forever, as always, with these conversations, but I am mindful of the fact that I told you it would be about an hour conversation. And so I will let you go for now. I might come back to you once we launch the Excel, so maybe we need a second part to our conversation. But thank
Yeah,
you
we
so
should
much.
we should do a tasting or something, which should be fun to do it over at the farm and what you are tasting.
Oh yes, that would be good. We've never done that before. We should do that. That's a great idea. Well, thank you, Komal, so much for taking the time. This was super interesting and definitely a topic in coffee that we hadn't broached before in our Context Coffee Chats. So thank you very, very much for sharing all of that information and also for putting in all this hard work to explore those different species and look into, well, what the future can hold for coffee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it was lovely chatting with you.